LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the February 26th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, along with a clip from Saturday Night Live last Saturday for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. As you can see from the video title, my main topic is going to be, can Republicans support in vitro fertilization and life beginning at conception? Because there's like a huge contradiction there, and it was covered on most of the Sunday shows. At least mentioned briefly on all the Sunday shows. And I don't think they really showed that there was that big contradiction, especially when they had Republicans on who should have been forced to try to stop that contradiction from happening. But I'll get to that. I'll show Greg Abbott not being cross-examined very well by Dan Abash on CNN. And I will also show you Byron Donalds not being cross-examined very well by Kristen Welker on this topic. If you want to see all the clips, down in the video description, I put brief summaries of all 11 clips. And I'm going to start with Saturday Night Live and this topic came up, of course, because there's this big Alabama Supreme Court decision in the last week finding that the destruction of in vitro fertilization frozen embryos creates a cause of action for wrongful death of a minor. And Saturday Night Live made fun of that decision on the Weekend Update program with the jokes I'm going to show you and talk about with you a little more after we watch them together over here.
The Alabama Supreme Court ruled that embryos created through IVF are children and that black embryos can be tried as adults. Colin. It's crazy that they're saying that embryos are the same as children. If you think an embryo is the same as a baby, try telling your wife, "Hey, honey, I left our baby in the freezer." Even Donald Trump thinks this decision goes too far. He came out strongly in favor of IVF, saying this:
I strongly support the availability of IVF for couples who are trying to have a precious little beautiful baby.
Yeah, I mean, he had me right up until the end when he said little baby like he was Rumpelstiltskin. I must have their beautiful little delicious babies. And Trump is also like Rumpelstiltskin in that he clearly wove his own hair out of straw.
Yeah, there were some good jokes there. And this, by the way, is Cheech, one of my two kittens. Cheech and Chong are almost 6 months old. We think they were born around September 1st, and we adopted them December 9th. And they're getting big. They're getting big. You can see how big. Look how big he is here. Much bigger than when I first showed you. I probably have a chance to show you Chong later. I thought I had a video clip for you, but it's going to turn out, I think, just to be a still image, a very cute still image of Cheech and Chong at the end. I thought I had this on video, but whatever. Somehow it didn't happen. But anyway, those were good jokes from Saturday Night Live. Like I said, my favorite one... What's going on down there? My favorite one is that the black embryos can be tried as adults. That was that was pretty good. And I think the clip of Donald Trump is important there because you're going to see all the Republicans, or the Republicans I talked about, Greg Abbott and Byron Donalds, both like pivoting to, I support what Donald Trump said, that we want more babies, we want to support IVF, but there is a basic contradiction there, and that is that if you believe that life begins at conception, as many Republicans have said, then you can't really, because if you look at this Alabama Supreme Court case, which, by the way, I put a link down under sources in the video description where you can read the whole case. just the way the case is headed, like the title of the case, shows you some of like, this is almost political comedy here. You can see the parties here. There's James LePage and Emily LePage, individually and as parents and next friends of two deceased LePage embryos, embryo A and embryo B. So I guess they kind of had names. And then you see the Fondes, and they are the parents and next friends of the two deceased Fonde embryos, embryo C and embryo D. So, I mean, if you're referring to them as like embryo A, B, C, and D, that kind of already shows you that they're not the same as born children, but that's the exact opposite of what the Alabama Supreme Court case found. What happened is someone like destroyed some embryos, dropped them in the freezer or something at this fertility clinic in Alabama, and these parents wanted to sue under the tort of wrongful death. It's a civil suit that says that you killed my minor child. And the question was, do they identify these embryos as minor children that you can sue in wrongful death? And here's like the key part of that decision. The upshot here is the phrase minor child means the same thing in the wrongful death of a minor act as it does in everyday parlance. An unborn or recently born individual member of the human species from fertilization into the age of majority. Is that really true, that people refer to like their fertilized embryos as, oh, this is my minor child? I mean, you heard Colin Jost in the Saturday Night Live jokes there say, if you think that's true, then tell your wife I left our baby in the freezer and see how it goes. But I look at it the other way around. I think I've used this hypothetical in the past. Say you're in one of these fertility clinics and there's a fire, it catches fire, and you happen to be in the lab and there's an actual born baby there in a bassinet, like a 6-month-old baby in a bassinet. And next to that baby, there's a box of 100 frozen embryos, temperature controlled. And the thing is, you only have the strength to carry out either that baby or that box of 100 frozen embryos. Who are you going to save? Are you going to save the 100 frozen embryos and let the 6-month-old baby die? I don't think most people would answer that way. I don't think that's the answer to the question. But that's not what the Alabama Supreme Court found. They found that it is just common usage, common sense, everyday parlance that we consider frozen embryos to be the same as our minor children. That's and I guess if you believe life begins at conception, that makes sense, but it doesn't, and you can't then do what you saw Donald Trump doing in that clip during the Saturday Night Live segment, where he said he's in favor of IVF, but he also believes life begins at conception. He's pro-life, or supposedly, and he's the one who appointed the Supreme Court justices that created this problem in the first place. And anyway, this was, I'm going to go through the news summaries now, and it's not covered very well in the news summaries. It's briefly mentioned, but then I'm going to show a specific segment from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos that covers it in depth with the effect on families in Alabama. But that is after I show the 5 news summaries from longest to shortest, the longest one being the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, where it's Martha Raddatz and Rachel Scott mostly talking about the results of the South Carolina primary, some really inappropriate remarks that Donald Trump made that I almost used for my political comedy. Some of the jokes he was making are worse than the political comedy clip I showed last week about the guy saying that Trump's like cool $400 sneakers are going to earn him cred in the black community. Well, you'll see Donald Trump made all these jokes about, or jokes, I don't even think he was joking, all these claims where he was saying that the fact that he's, been discriminated against in the criminal justice system and has a mugshot and indictments, that's going to endear him to the black community. And you'll see that covered by Rachel Scott in her report on the South Carolina primary and the primary results after an introduction from Martha Raddatz over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this morning, former President Donald Trump is one step closer to securing the GOP nomination for the White House. Last night, he easily won the South Carolina primary, defeating his one remaining challenger, Nikki Haley, in her home state by 20 points. Haley has vowed to remain in the race through Super Tuesday on March 5th, but after her defeat last night, the path looks even more narrow. And in a matter of weeks, Trump may officially have the delegates he needs to claim victory. Haley is still making the case that Trump is unelectable in November and that he sows chaos and division with his actions and his rhetoric. Our powerhouse political team is here to break down last night's results and Trump's latest controversial comments. And we begin with ABC's Rachel Scott in South Carolina. Good morning, Rachel.
Martha, good morning. Look, Donald Trump was so confident he barely even campaigned in this state, delivering a crushing blow to Nikki Haley in a state that elected her to the governor's mansion twice. Haley knew this was going to be an uphill challenge, that the odds were stacked against her. This morning, she is defiant, vowing to stay in this race, still making the case that she is the only Republican that can defeat President Biden in November. But she has to get through Donald Trump first. And exit polls show that the voters that know her perhaps the best, right here in South Carolina, they were not buying that electability argument. As for Trump, he is laser focused on the general election. He didn't even mention her a single time in his victory speech, Martha.
And Rachel, the night before the primary, former President Trump made several comments at the Black Conservative Federation Gala in South Carolina there that the Biden campaign is calling outright racist. Let's listen.
I got indicted a second time and a third time and a fourth time. And a lot of people said that that's why the black people like me, because they have been hurt so badly and discriminated against. I think that's why the black people are so much on my side now, because they see what's happening to me happens to them. The mugshot, we've all seen the mugshot. And you know who embraced it more than anybody else? The black population. It's incredible. You see black people walking around with my mugshot. These lights are so bright in my eyes that I can't see too many people out there. But I can only see the black ones. I can't see any white ones, you see? That's how far I've come.
And Rachel, those comments didn't seem to hurt him last night at all.
No, and the crowd was cheering. I'm told that Trump's team, though, was caught off guard by those comments. That was not in the script. The former president trying to appeal to black voters. He won just 6% of the black vote in 2016, 8% in 2020. He's looking at President Biden's low approval ratings across the board. He does see an opening there, and he talked a lot about criminal justice reform, signing the First Step Act into law. That is something, though, that he doesn't mention nearly as much when campaigning in front of predominantly white crowds in places like Iowa and New Hampshire. And his pitch was essentially that because he's a criminal defendant, because he has a mugshot, black voters will suddenly like him even more. Nikki Haley lashing out against those comments, calling them disgusting. She says that it's a warning sign for the party as it's trying to expand its tent. And of course, this morning, you have Democrats pointing to a long list of racially insensitive things that the former president has said, from being accused of discriminating against black attendants. He was sued back in the 1970s over that, to pushing false conspiracy birtherism theories about former President Barack Obama, to telling 4 congresswomen of color who were American citizens to going back to where they came from, Martha.
Okay, thanks very much, Rachel, there in South Carolina. And Rick Klein, what do you see when you look at last night? Are there any warning signs for Donald Trump?
Yeah, inside a rout, you do see some concerns that might be there for a Trump candidacy going forward. He's got core Republicans. We saw this in the exit polls. He won Republican voters by about 40 points last night. But independents, that's another story. And of course, this was an open primary. Anyone could vote. Nikki Haley actually carried independent voters by about 20 points. So it's one thing to win a Republican primary, but the general election is another story.
Okay, and I'm not going to show the rest of Rick Klein's report, because I'm going to show you a report that came later on Alabama families affected by the in vitro fertilization ruling. But I mean, I thought that was an okay report, and it did cover the controversial comments from Donald Trump about, like the black people are going to like him because he's a criminal or whatever, or accused criminal, and they're It's, as you saw in the report, the Biden campaign is calling it racist. Do you think it's racist? Well, I think one good indication that it is kind of racist is no mention of it anywhere on Fox News Sunday. They did cover the results of the South Carolina primary in ways very favorable to Donald Trump, but not really so much in their news summary. Their news summary was mostly focused on foreign policy. You'll see this in some of the other news summaries, but here because it was the 2-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, or the latest Russian invasion of Ukraine, if you don't count the time they took over Crimea and some eastern parts of Ukraine. That's like 14 years ago at this point. Did I have that right? Like 14 years ago that happened. But the bigger invasion that happened 2 years ago just hit the 2-year anniversary, and that's covered by Greg Palkot. They have Greg Palkot on with Shannon Bream on Fox News Sunday, which is exciting for me because my very first LiberalViewer video, like way back July 20th, 2006, Fox News tries to make the news in Lebanon. And the reporter there that I was criticizing, Greg Palkot, he was in my very first LiberalViewer video. You can check that out later if you want, but I'm going to now show you Greg Palkot in Kyiv reporting on the 2-year anniversary of the war and some of the problems. And they also start off with latest strikes on the Houthis in Yemen, and they cover the death of Alexei Navalny and the controversy with his mother trying to get his body back. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. Making headlines today, U.S. and coalition forces conducted joint strikes on 18 Houthi targets in Yemen overnight, striking weapons and missile storage facilities. The Iranian-backed Houthis have been attacking commercial ships in the Red Sea since shortly after the start of the Israel-Hamas war. In Russia, prison officials turned over the body of opposition leader Alexei Navalny to his mother Saturday, 8 days after the 47-year-old dissident died at a penal colony in Siberia. Russia's ally, Belarus, is holding tightly controlled parliamentary elections, which opposition leaders call, quote, a senseless farce. President Alexander Lukashenko has ruled the country for nearly 3 decades, backed by Vladimir Putin. In Ukraine, Russia's defense ministry says its forces have advanced further west while repelling Ukrainian counterattacks near Avdiivka. In a moment, our interview with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. But first, let's turn to Fox News senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palkot live in Kyiv, Ukraine, where ceremonies are being held to mark 2 years since Russia's invasion. Greg.
Hi, Shannon. Yeah, Russia marked the anniversary, as you might expect, firing 18 drones and 2 missiles overnight at Kyiv and other cities. We heard the sirens. Most were knocked down, but Russia's might is being felt here more and more.
2 years ago this weekend, Russia's war against Ukraine began. After Vladimir Putin's missiles rained down, tanks rolled in, threatening Ukraine from all sides. That moment marked at a ceremony presided over by President Zelensky and other Western leaders at an airfield outside of Kyiv, where Ukrainian soldiers faced down and turned back the Russians. Now, with the war turning into a grim and deadly battle of attrition, with Russia making inroads along a long front line, Zelensky praised newly signed security pacts.
We haven't had such powerful agreements before. It's very important. Whatever is promised in whatever volumes need to be executed.
Still, some $60 billion in U.S. military aid remains blocked on Capitol Hill. Senate Democratic Majority Leader Chuck Schumer was just here, leading a congressional delegation pledging to deliver for Ukraine.
We will not abandon you. We will fight and fight and fight to get this needed aid to you.
Assistance appreciated in places like Bucha, a town hit hard early on by marauding Russians, patched up now but still feeling the pain.
On the outside you see it's renovated, but inside it's still hard.
And to the many who came this weekend to a memorial in the center of Kyiv, each small flag representing a soldier killed in the war.
It's sad, big sad. I hate Russia.
They killed our future.
The Ukrainian Defense Ministry says it has an action plan for 2024. It can only say, though, that it's powerful, strong, will offer hope, and deliver results. All those much needed right now. Shannon.
Greg Palkot reporting from Kyiv, Ukraine. Greg, thank you. Joining us now, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
Yeah, so that was the report from Fox News. I mean, it did seem somewhat biased against the Biden administration, and it almost seemed a little bit pro-Russian in terms of the strength of Russia and how they're doing better, and I don't know, and not so much about the Republicans who are one of the reasons that Ukraine is not getting aid that was covered later in the program, but I don't have any clips of Jake Sullivan, even though he was on 4 of the 5 programs. I heard him give like the same answer 4 different times when he was asked about Russia doing better and the war going on for over 2 years. And it was like, well, you know, back when this war started, we didn't think they were going to last for 2 weeks. And now it's been 2 years. I heard him say basically that same thing 4 different times to 4 different interviewers. And anyway, that's not the topic I chose to cover for you all. I don't know why the Fox News decided not to put the South Carolina primary results in their opening news segment. Maybe because they might have had to cover Trump's controversial comments about how blacks like him because he's been criminally indicted, which, of course, Fox News did cover the South Carolina primary results later and never covered that topic at all, never mentioned anywhere on Fox News Sunday, but you saw it in the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary before, and now you're going to see it again in the CBS News Face the Nation news summary with Margaret Brennan and Robert Costa reporting on the South Carolina primary results and Donald Trump's controversial comments in the third of the news summaries I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. Yesterday's South Carolina Republican primary turned out as expected, with a big win for Donald Trump. Last night in Charleston, former Governor and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley put her best spin on the result.
I'm going to count it. I know 40% is not 50%. But I also know 40% is not some tiny group.
As for the former president, his Friday night remarks at the Black Conservative Federation Gala in Columbia, South Carolina, continued to overshadow his victory.
Black conservatives understand better than most that some of the greatest evils in our nation's history have come from corrupt systems that try to target and subjugate others to deny them their freedom and to deny them their rights. You understand that. I think that's why the black people are so much on my side now, because they see what's happening to me happens to them. These lights are so bright in my eyes that I can't see too many people out there. But I can only see the black ones. I can't see any white ones, you see. That's how far I've come.
We begin with CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa, who joins us from Charleston. Bob, this was an open primary in South Carolina, but just 3% of voters were black. Do Donald Trump's remarks about black Americans give the party any pause here?
It's giving Nikki Haley a road ahead at this point, Margaret. She and her campaign believe there are many traditional Republicans across the country who are fed up, not only with former President Trump's legal problems, but his incendiary comments on race. And they believe that that could ostracize key voters across the country come November. That's why she's staying in right now, going to Michigan this week for that primary, staying in through Super Tuesday. But there is real worry that as Trump takes over the party and the Republican National Committee, there's no reckoning about how he's handling issues like race and immigration.
How long can Nikki Haley stay in the race?
As long as there's money, I've been talking to donors over the past 12 hours, and they say they're going to keep pouring money into her campaign and into her super PAC. But at the same time, they know that Super Tuesday, come early March, that's going to be a real crossroads for her. Going past Super Tuesday, going to be very difficult in terms of organization and fundraising. And she has told reporters in recent days that she's not thinking beyond that at this point.
Day to day. All right, Robert Costa, thank you. We turn now to the crisis in the Middle East and the war between Israel and Hamas. Joining us from Tel Aviv is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
And I don't have any clips of Bibi Netanyahu, but down in the video description under sources, you can see a link to the Face the Nation YouTube channel where the entire Face the Nation episode is uploaded. Also, the entire Meet the Press episode is uploaded on the NBC News YouTube channel. Both those links are down in the video description under sources. I am going to move on to the next news summary. You saw there that CBS, Margaret Brennan, Robert Costa, they covered the controversial Trump comments and the South Carolina results. Here you'll see NBC News Meet the Press cover all three. There's a brief mention of the 2-year anniversary of Ukraine, the Trump controversial comments, and the South Carolina primary results from Kristen Welker in the Meet the Press news summary from yesterday. I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
Good Sunday morning. Former President Donald Trump is solidifying his grip on the Republican nomination after beating Nikki Haley in the Midwest, the Northeast, the West, and now the South. Trump delivering a crushing blow to Haley in her home state on Saturday, trouncing her by nearly 20 points with nearly 60% of the vote. The former president dominating nearly every key group in the South Carolina Republican primary electorate, according to NBC News exit poll results. Trump now setting his sights squarely on the general election.
In certain countries, you're allowed to call your election date. If I had the right to do it, I'd do it tomorrow. I'd say we're having an election tomorrow.
More than 60% of South Carolina Republican primary voters said in exit polls they would consider Trump fit to be president even if he was convicted of a crime. But Nikki Haley defiant, vowing to stay in the race through Super Tuesday, but not saying what will happen after that.
I'm going to count it. I know 40% is not 50%. But I also know 40% is not some tiny group. In the next 10 days, another 21 states and territories will speak. They have the right to a real choice. Not a Soviet-style election with only one candidate.
As former President Trump looks to a likely general election rematch with President Biden, a growing chorus of his aides and allies tell NBC News they want him to fixate less on personal grievances and instead focus on hitting President Biden and unifying the Republican Party. The challenges of that were on display on Friday night during a speech at the Black Conservative Federation's annual gala in South Carolina. Trump griped about his legal troubles, including 4 indictments, complaining of discrimination.
I got indicted a second time and a third time and a fourth time. And a lot of people said that that's why the black people like me, because they have been hurt so badly and discriminated against. And they actually viewed me as I'm being discriminated against.
We'll get to all of it later this hour, but we begin with the 2-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine. On Saturday, Ukrainian President Zelensky promised his country would win the war despite a series of setbacks, saying we are 730 days closer to victory. Joining me now is National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
So yeah, actually, of all the news summaries, that one was probably the best for covering all the issues. Fox News spent too much time on foreign policy and I think, and left out the controversial Trump comments. You saw there, NBC News Meet the Press did cover the 2-year anniversary of the war, the South Carolina primary results, and Trump's controversial comments that black people like him because he's been accused of being a criminal, whatever that's supposed to mean. And then finally, I'm going to show the shortest news summary, CNN State of the Union, Dana Bash, just the South Carolina primary results, and also a brief mention of the 2-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in the final news summary to juxtapose with the other 4 and decide which did it best over in this clip.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington when the State of our Union is watching another primary election blowout. Donald Trump is celebrating another victory today, a landslide win in South Carolina, the home state of his remaining GOP rival, former Governor Nikki Haley.
There's never been a spirit like this, and I just want to say that I have never seen the Republican Party so unified as it is right now. Never been like this.
Does anyone seriously think Joe Biden or Donald Trump will unite our country to solve our problems?
Haley vowed to continue her fight at least through Super Tuesday, 9 days from now. And coming up, I'll speak to Governors Greg Abbott and Gretchen Whitmer about the presidential race. But first, Trump's win last night proves again his incredible grip on the GOP base. This past week, we saw his influence shaping U.S. policy on the world stage as Ukraine marked 2 years since Russia's invasion, and it's unclear whether Trump's allies in Congress will allow a vote on desperately needed aid for that effort. Here with me now is President Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan.
And like I said, I don't have a clip of Jake Sullivan, but he was on 4 of the 5 shows, and down in the video description under sources, you can look at all those shows. I think he wasn't on Face the Nation, but he was on the other 4, and you can see him talk about Ukraine and other national security related issues there if you want. But you can tell me which of those 5 news summaries you think was best. I think Meet the Press probably covered the issues most eclectically, but you can let me know what you think. And I guess I could criticize all of them for not really covering the Alabama Supreme Court decision on IVF that shows like how the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade after 50 years is continuing to have really bad effects on a lot of women and a lot of parents or prospective parents, and it's really a bad situation, and it's all the fault of Republicans and their 50-year terrible journey towards overturning Roe v. Wade, which created a right of women to control their bodies and their own reproduction, and now it's all gone because of Donald Trump and the Republicans. And if you want to see the real world effects of that, as I promised earlier, there's this extra news summary from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They have their reporter, Elizabeth Schultze, I think her name is pronounced, talking to families in Alabama who are impacted by the Alabama Supreme Court ruling. And that was probably the best news summary of the issue from yesterday. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this bonus news summary from ABC. This was, not that far into the program, like after Rachel Scott and Rick Klein talked about the South Carolina primary results. This is like 6 to 9 minutes into the program over here.
We turn now to the uproar over IVF this week after the Alabama Supreme Court's decision that frozen embryos should be considered people. The state's Republican governor now says she's working on a solution with GOP lawmakers to protect IVF access in the state. But for now, families in Alabama are left waiting as the political implications are being felt across the country. ABC's Elizabeth Schultze spoke with some of those Alabama families.
I want so badly to become a mother.
Both of us want.
This is our biggest prayer and dream.
It's a dream that's now on hold for Emily Capolito and her husband James after an historic and contentious decision by Alabama's Supreme Court.
I'm really angry and I'm really sad.
The couple's frozen embryos were the result of an arduous fertility journey, costing more than $50,000 and countless hours of shots, hormones, and anxiety. Their fertility clinic at the University of Alabama at Birmingham is the biggest of 3 major providers in the state that has paused IVF treatments.
It has been very scary because I have not had any answers.
238,000 American families turn to in vitro fertilization, or IVF, every year to get pregnant. Multiple embryos are typically frozen to try to increase the likelihood that one will successfully implant. Discarding unused embryos is a routine part of the process. But after Alabama's Supreme Court ruling, it could be considered a crime.
That decision has a ton of unintended consequences.
In the ruling, the court said frozen embryos qualify as children, and anyone who discards them could be liable for wrongful death. For doctors like Beth Malizia at Alabama Fertility Specialists, that's too much of a legal risk.
Did you expect to be in a position where you're pausing this standard care for fertility because of a decision by the state Supreme Court? Not at all. And I think maybe I was naive with that. I think the Dobbs decision blew open a door, and we don't know what's on the other side of that.
Reproductive rights advocates warned overturning Roe v. Wade put not just abortions, but fertility treatments at risk too. President Biden said this week that's exactly what's happened, calling Alabama's decision outrageous and unacceptable, and blaming former President Trump for appointing justices who overturned Roe. After public uproar over Alabama's decision, Trump came out in full-throated support of IVF, but didn't comment on the court's decision that embryos are people.
We want to make it easier for mothers and fathers to have babies, not harder.
Gabby Price and her husband in Leeds, Alabama, had been trying without success for 7 years to get pregnant.
We really wanted to give as many children as possible, like, a loving home.
After a miscarriage last year, they sold their home and moved into this camper van to save money for their last resort, IVF. Gabby started a new job just for its fertility benefits.
Does this change your view of who you would want representing you, who you would choose to vote for?
It absolutely does. There's been a lot of talk about the fall of Roe v. Wade and the effects that that's had, and I think this is a big one.
For This Week, Elizabeth Schulze in Birmingham, Alabama.
And I'm joined now by Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois.
And Senator Tammy Duckworth actually had some great answers about her experiencing using in vitro fertilization and about how Republicans are running and hiding. And I'm not taking that clip because I just showed that that was my second ABC clip, and I thought it was worthwhile showing the impact here. I mean, they talked about the wrongful death statute and calling frozen embryos a child and showed families that are really impacted by it. And they did kind of point out that Donald Trump was in favor of IVF, but didn't really comment on what the Alabama Supreme Court did. And there's like a total contradiction at the core of Republican pro-life philosophy. If you think that life begins at conception, well, the IVF process, as it says in the Alabama Supreme Court ruling, they create all the, they harvest eggs, they fertilize them in vitro, as many as, for like 2 or 3 possible rounds of implantation. And if it takes the first time, those leftover embryos, they get discarded, they get donated for experimentation. The embryos that are flawed also get donated. They basically, you have to create more embryos than you use for the IVF process, and then if those are people, those people are going to die. And there's no way around it. If you believe that a frozen embryo is a full person with all the rights of personhood, there's no way around that. And that's like the big point that wasn't really covered on any of the shows. Even on ABC there, they kind of alluded to it a little bit. You saw that last woman say, this is a big effect of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Well, yeah, that's true. But it wasn't really pointed out as strongly as it should have been on any of the networks. Now, ABC had that whole report that was pretty good there about the issue. The worst coverage of this issue was on Fox News Sunday, as you might expect, because they're trying to run away from the whole abortion issue. And, the less they talk about it, the better for Trump, I guess. And in fact, the word or the word IVF, in vitro fertilization, any reference to this Alabama Supreme Court decision only came up once on the entire Fox News Sunday program. It was brought up by the one person on the left, Juan Williams, and he's just like barely on the left, who was on the Fox News Sunday discussion panel. And they were actually talking about Trump's problems in Michigan, which has like a really large Arab and Muslim population for a U.S. state. And Rashida Tlaib is asking people in the Michigan primary coming up tomorrow to vote not committed rather than for Biden as a protest vote against his policy that's too pro-Israel, according to people who support the Palestinians. And that was Shannon Bream's question. They were really heavily into foreign policy this week, as you saw from the news summary. And Shannon Bream is asking Juan Williams about the Biden's problems with his Israel policy in Michigan. And during his answer, Juan Williams makes one very brief reference to the IVF issue in Alabama, and Shannon Bream, of course, immediately brings the conversation back to foreign policy, and that's the only brief mention on Fox News Sunday of my main topic of my live stream this week, and that shows you the bias on Fox News, just right with that topic selection, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
To that point, I want to bring up something that the president is worrying about this on his left flank, increasing criticism and calls for people from his own party to not vote for him, to vote for uncommitted. Looking ahead to that primary in Michigan on Tuesday, Politico says this: inside that critical battleground state, some Democrats fear the president's team doesn't appreciate the depths of discontent from Arab American and young voters. They quote one state senator saying, if the president doesn't change course, I would not be surprised if Biden loses the state in November. I believe he won there by about 150,000 votes, won last time around. So it is a state you need in order to win.
Yeah, I think it's one of about 7 that I would say you can target at this juncture in February, saying is necessary for whoever's going to win in November. But let me point out that in some ways, you have to remember that Biden won as a centrist in the 2020 primaries, and he won as a moderate, the anti-chaos candidate in the general election in 2020. So to have people on the left criticizing him in some ways reinforces his image as not some kind of left-wing guy that I think a lot of people on the right would like to caricature him as. And so you have to keep in mind also, last 3 elections, I think it's more than that, they're 5 points apart. This is going to be a coin flip in November. It's going to be a very close election. And if you think of it in those terms, you think about the fundamentals of the race. And right now, the fundamentals, if you're sitting on the Biden side, don't look that bad. The economy, stock market set a record this week.
But people aren't feeling
Unemployment's
it.
down.
We talk about the polls. People don't feel it yet.
Right. So my thinking is, if I'm running ads, and by the way, the Biden people have a big advantage right now on money over the Trump people. If you're running ads, I run ads about this is a great economy, jobs right now, unemployment record lows. You think about abortion as an issue and the IVF that's going on in Alabama. I'd run a ton of ads at suburban women.
Yeah, and we've seen that in a number of special elections and midterm elections and all kinds of things, that has been very successful for Democrats. While we're on this issue of foreign policy, I want to play a little bit of.
So yeah, that was the only mention of IVF. Oh, and I think. Did I promise I was going to show you? This is Chong. The other, I showed you Cheech earlier. Here is Chong. He kind of just walked up here. And you can see he is also getting very big. And, I can almost, he's ready to get down now. But I'm sorry I don't have video of Cheech and Chong at the end. I only have a still frame. I thought I took some video of them in this situation that I only have a still frame from, but oh, that's my bonus Cheech and Chong still frame at the end, I guess. But now you have seen live Cheech and Chong video, and you also just saw, like I said, the only brief mention of Alabama and their decision on frozen embryos being people. Oh, I don't know if you heard that mewing there, but this is what I have to deal with while I'm trying to do my live stream. They're two silly kittens, and they're infringing on my ability to live stream it. Anytime I could be impacted by the silliness of these kittens. That's all I'm saying. But you saw the bias from Fox News there. That was the only mention of in vitro fertilization and the Alabama Supreme Court decision in the entire broadcast. And the thing is, they had on Representative Nancy Mace, who is a Republican woman in the Congress who has spoken out on how Republicans have to do better on the abortion issue and being more pro-mother. And the thing is, Nancy Mace signed on to the Life at Conception federal legislation. Down in the video description under sources, I put a link to the 166 Republican co-sponsors of that bill in the 117th Congress, which is the last Congress. There are only 3 co-sponsors of the same bill this Congress, but Nancy Mace co-sponsored the Life at Conception bill, and Shannon Bream had her on, didn't ask her any questions about IVF or the Alabama Supreme Court decision or how Republicans can reconcile supposedly supporting IVF, but also saying life begins at conception. Now, I criticize Fox News for not talking about the Alabama decision and IVF at all, except for Juan Williams bringing it up there. Face the Nation on CBS didn't do that much better. I mean, at least Margaret Brennan brought up, it's in the same context they have on Representative Debbie Dingell from Michigan. And after talking about problems Biden is having with the Muslim population in Michigan because of his Israel policy, Margaret Brennan kind of follows up and says, well, do you think the reproductive access issues can counteract those negative headwinds? And then Debbie Dingell brings up the IVF decision in Alabama Supreme Court over in this clip.
Is the concern about reproductive health care access enough to cancel out these negative headwinds?
Look, Michigan had unprecedented turnout 2 years ago when the issue was on the ballot. I'm going to be blunt. You know me, I am. We got to get young people, we got to get women, and we got to go in the union halls. And it's great that we've got the union presidents and the union organizations endorsing, but we've got to go in those union halls and draw the comparison, remind people about what Donald Trump did and didn't do. He talked, didn't deliver, and about what Joe Biden has delivered on. Women turning out is going to be absolutely critical. And they thought that when they voted on this on the ballot last year, they were safe. And now we've seen what the Alabama court has done in terms of IVF. Now the Republicans are scared to death and all running out and saying they support IVF. You know what? They've never been someone who's tried to get pregnant. They've never had to live through all of this. And I think a lot of women are going to be very emotional about their women's health decisions should be made between them, their doctor, their faith, and their family. And the federal government's got no business in it.
Congresswoman Dingell, thank
state
you.
Government.
Thank you for being direct, as you said. We're going to.
So yeah, that was a little better than what Fox News Sunday did, but that was also still the only mention of the Alabama decision and in vitro fertilization on Face the Nation. So not that much better than Fox News Sunday. And the next two clips are Republicans who sort of get cross-examined on the issue, but not very well. And, you know, before or after I showed the Fox News Sunday clip with Juan Williams, I mentioned how Representative Nancy Mace was on Fox News Sunday and didn't get questioned at all about, in vitro fertilization, even though she was one of the 166 co-sponsors of the Life at Conception bill in the 117th Congress. That's the last Congress, not the current one. Well, guess who else was a co-sponsor of that bill? Byron Donalds from Florida, another Trump supporter. And he was on Meet the Press with Kristen Welker, and she let him get away with claiming he was in favor of in vitro fertilization because he's known so many couples who it helps. But then when it comes to, are embryos persons, even though he answered that question, yes, he said, well, I only heard half the question, and I'm in favor of the personhood of embryos, but also in favor of IVF. And when she asked some sort of follow-up questions about the personhood of embryos, he's like, that's a complicated question. The devil's in the details, and it's different from what a judge says, from a legislature and a governor, and he even talks about there has to be. And Kristen Welker asks if he would support a bill that protects IVF, and he says the devil's in the details, but she never asks him about his being one of the 166 co-sponsors of the Life at Conception Act, and how you can believe that life begins at conception, but you can also support a process that ends up discarding conceived people, frozen embryos. As I was talking about earlier, you can't do in vitro fertilization under, at least the way it works now, without having extra embryos that get discarded at the end for almost all the participants. You can call them embryo A, B, C, and D, or whatever you want to call them, but there's some of them that are going to get discarded or donated for research, or they're people who are going to die, who you believe had their life start at conception. Byron Donalds signed on to the Life at Conception bill in the 117th Congress. As I put down in the video description under sources, you can see all the 166 Republicans who co-sponsored that bill. Kristen Welker never asks him about it. Cross-examines him a little bit, but not well enough, but according to my opinion, you can let me know what you think after we watch that clip together over here.
I want to talk about the Alabama IVF ruling. This week, you said that you agreed with the state Supreme Court's decision that embryos are children. I just want to put a fine point on this. Do you support IVF as it is practiced in the United States, which involves the production of embryos that are sometimes destroyed or even donated if they're unused?
Well, first, I do support IVF because I have several friends that have gone through that procedure. It has made their families whole. It's allowed them to have children. Their children are beautiful. They're wonderful. I totally support the procedure. Number two, when the MSNBC reporter asked me that question, I was in the middle of a hallway. I heard the tail end of it. I didn't hear about the Alabama ruling. It was about, do I support that embryos should be protected as life? Look, embryos are important to the production of life. We all come from embryos. That's what I said because I heard half her question. But do I support the IVF procedure? 100% I do. It should be made available. And I believe, as President Trump has also said, we really want the Alabama legislature to make sure that that procedure is protected for families who do struggle with having children. That helps them actually create great families, which is what our country desperately needs.
So just to be very clear, though, if you believe that embryos are children, do you think they should be treated as people with all the same legal rights as people?
Well, I think now you're getting to a personhood argument, and this is where a lot of the details in legislation, not just court rulings, are important. I believe that this is something that the legislatures have to make sure they weigh and walk themselves through. The IVF procedure is very important to a lot of couples in our country. It should be protected. I agree with President Trump on that. But when we get into these conversations, it's important to delineate from what just one judge might say versus what a legislature and a governor will decide when they go through the legislative process.
And you raised the point that President Trump is calling for lawmakers in Alabama to take action. There is also federal legislation that is being proposed. Will you support that that would protect IVF services at the federal level?
Like any type of bill that gets drafted on Capitol Hill, I want to see the devil in the details. But yes, I feel I could broadly support that because, like I said, IVF is something that is so critical to a lot of couples. It helps them breed great families. Our country needs that.
All right, let me ask you now about Ukraine.
Breed great families. The word breed there kind of struck me funny the first time I heard it, and now that I've listened to it for the third time. I watched these clips like three times. Once when I originally watched the program, a second time when I'm capturing the clip, and then the third time when I'm live streaming it to you. And I don't think the word breed is the right word there. That's not for people, that's for animals, or anyway, I don't know. But like I said before I showed the clip, Kristen Welker did try to follow up about whether an embryo should have all the same rights as a person, but then Byron Donalds used this dodge of it being, well, that's up to a legislature and the governor. Well, Kristen Welker should have followed up with, well, you're in a legislature, you're in the Congress, and you were one of the 166 co-sponsors of the Life at Conception bill back in the previous Congress. I mean, do you still believe life begins at conception, like that bill that you co-sponsored? And the devil's in the details, sure, but the devil is that you've decided that a frozen embryo is the same as a 6-month-old baby in a bassinet. And, I actually really wish someone would have asked him, if there was a fire in a fertility clinic and you could carry out a box full of 100 frozen embryos or a 6-month-old baby in a bassinet, which would you choose? Now, that would have been a good question, but anyway, I mentioned that earlier closer to the beginning of the program, but that is like my hypothetical scenario that I think really tells you whether a frozen embryo is a baby or not. And the answer is no, a frozen embryo is not a born baby. But I also think that for my final newsmaker clip here, CNN's Dana Bash did not do a great job of cross-examining Governor Greg Abbott about the contradiction between being pro-life, believing life begins at conception, and then supporting in vitro fertilization, where the current procedures, as I mentioned, for most couples ends up with the discarding of fertilized embryos. People, if you believe life begins at conception, IVF involves the discarding of people, the donating of people to science for experimentation. That's pretty gruesome, right? If you believe those frozen embryos are full-fledged people with all the rights of personhood, like the Personhood Amendment, and like they believe in the pro-life state of Texas. Greg Abbott says, Texas is a pro-life state, but he's won't give his position. That's something for us to work out. We're going to work that out. That's an issue that Texas is going to address. Well, Dana Bash doesn't really get him to address it, though, and actually kind of gives him cover by saying multiple times, well, it's a complicated issue. It's a complicated issue. Well, it's not that complicated that if you believe a frozen embryo is a person, that in vitro fertilization is going to be problematic. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that final newsmaker clip for the program today over here.
I want to ask you about what happened in Alabama. The Supreme Court there ruled that frozen embryos should be considered human beings. That, of course, as you know, prompted 3 IVF fertility clinics in the state to abruptly pause care in order to avoid potential liability for wrongful deaths if the embryos were to be destroyed. Do you agree with the Alabama Supreme Court that embryos are human beings?
Well, listen, obviously there's some uncertainty lingering from this, but candidly, let's go back to President Trump, because President Trump put out a statement on this that I think a lot of people agree with, and that is a goal that we all kind of want to achieve, and that is we want to make it easier for people to be able to have babies, not make it harder. And the IVF process is a way of giving life to even more babies. And so what I think the goal is to make sure that we can find a pathway to ensure that parents who otherwise may not have the opportunity to have a child will be able to have access to the IVF process and become parents and give life to babies. And because this is a relatively new issue, we're just going to find ways to navigate laws and fact situations that are very complicated.
Well, let me ask you about your state. Texas has one of the strictest anti-abortion laws in the country. Are you saying that families in Texas who are using IVF have extra embryos that are frozen, do not need to worry?
Well, so you raise fact questions that are complex that I simply don't know the answer to. Let me give you a couple of examples, and that is, I have no idea mathematically the number of frozen embryos. Is it 1, 10, 100, 1,000? Things like that matter. What I don't know is families who may have frozen embryos, what happens if they were done so that a mother could have a pregnancy, but after those embryos were frozen, the mother passes away? What happens then? What happens if after the embryos are frozen, the mother and the husband, they get a divorce? Here's my point in telling you that, Dana, and that is these are very complex issues where I'm not sure everybody has really thought about what all the potential problems are, and as a result, no one really knows what the potential answers are. And I think you're going to see states across the entire country coming together and grappling with these issues and coming up with solutions.
Yeah, it is incredibly complicated. You said states across the country. Your state is a pretty important one. Will you be urging the legislature to come up with laws that deal with this this question and keep IVF legal?
So for one, I have no doubt that Texas will be among the states that will be addressing this issue when we can bring together all the different fact scenarios about what could happen. But also knowing Texas, and as you know, Texas is a pro-life state. And we want to do everything possible that we can to maintain Texas being a pro-life state. But at the very same time, I think Texans agree with what President Trump said, and that is we as a state want to ensure that we promote life, we bring more life into the world, and we empower parents to be able to have more children.
Yeah, it is very, very complicated. I want to turn to the border.
Yeah, it's very complicated. I want to turn to the border. That is exactly my criticism of Dana Bash, because he said Texas is a pro-life state, but we also want to support in vitro fertilization, and there's like a basic contradiction. If you believe that all those frozen embryos are full people with all the rights of people, how can you support a process that, as I've been discussing, are almost all the people involved, where they either get thrown away if they're extra embryos or they get donated for experimentation to science, and that is just not consistent. And Dana Bash just let the governor of Texas there, Greg Abbott, get away with not explaining the contradiction, just like Kristen Welker did, and really was not teased out or in any way shown in any of the Sunday shows, even though some covered the topic better than others. I don't really think the basic contradiction between you saw both Greg Abbott and Byron Donald say, well, I agree with Donald Trump. We should support IVF, even though we're pro-life and we overturned Roe v. Wade. And now we're saying that, or at least a big part of our movement is saying that life begins at conception. In fact, 166 Republicans co-sponsored the Life at Conception bill. And it just, there's a basic contradiction that hopefully will be clearer and clearer as we get closer to the election in November. And anyway, that's my last newsmaker clip. I will continue covering this issue and all the important issues all the way through the election in November. And as I've said, all the way through January 6, 2025. when we see who actually gets certified the winner of the election, and even through January 20th, 2025, when we find out who gets inaugurated. Might not, it could be like 3 different people, who knows? Like the winner of the election, the person who gets certified, and the person who gets inaugurated. It's all up in the air, and they might not match. That's why I'm going to keep doing the Monday Media Mix-Up all the way through there. I've committed to that. However many people watch the show, however much money I make from the show, both of which are lower than I like. So actually, if you want to financially support this project all the way through January 2025, there's a link right under the video to become a one-time Liberal Viewer financial supporter through PayPal, or a monthly supporter through Patreon. At the $5 level, I'll give you this weatherproof vinyl #LiberalViewer sticker and this ACLU Constitution with a Know Your Rights with the Police section in the back. If you donate $5 through PayPal or Patreon and give me a shipping address in the United States, these will both be yours within like a week or two. But I also appreciate the people who just support me by showing up and watching, giving me a thumbs up, subscribing to the channel, leaving comments, especially supportive comments, rooting me on all the way through January 2025. After that, maybe I'll do something else. Maybe I'll go back to Fox News bias videos. There's so much more Fox News bias than there used to be, so maybe I'll do that. But anyway, that is the end of the program, and I apologize I don't have a Cheech and Chong video. I thought I took this video of them over in the laundry basket, but apparently I just got a very cute still photo. So here's a very cute still photo of Cheech on the left and Chong on the right, in the laundry basket, because they are silly basket boys. Oh, and there's Chong mewing. I don't know if you heard that, probably not, walking by over there. But you also got to see Cheech and Chong live during the program, so you can't really complain. And anyway, I will be back next Monday and every Monday for almost the next year, all the way through the end of January 2025. And until next Monday, or until I have some other reason to upload a video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.